My name is Faith Terrell. I'm 34 years old. And on the Saturday morning of Labor Day weekend, I woke up in my mother's house to a silence so complete, I could hear the refrigerator hum. Because my family had left the state without me. For 2 weeks before that morning, they'd all told me the same thing, in the same careful voice. Don't make any plans. They whispered in the kitchen and went quiet the second I walked in. Just wait, my mother said, smiling. So I waited. I slept in my childhood bedroom because she asked me to stay one more night. I woke up to an empty driveway and a note on the counter, about my grandmother's medication. By noon, I was looking at my sister's Instagram story. A dock. A lake. My whole family, laughing, sunlit, together. And a caption I will remember on my deathbed. Best trip ever when she's not around. LOL. I didn't react. I didn't comment. I didn't call. I just waited, because there was one thing about that lake cottage that not one of them knew. 2 days later, my phone lit up with 63 missed calls, and one text from my mother. Please come home. We didn't know. Let it sit. Welcome back to Behind Closed Doors Revenge, where quiet women tell you exactly how they took their lives back. No shouting. No chaos. Just the truth, told slowly. If stories about family, boundaries, and long overdue justice speak to you, stay with me tonight, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. Let me back up. Because you need to know exactly who was left standing in that empty kitchen, holding a note that didn't even use her name. I run a small bookkeeping firm on Main Street, in a town called Crestwood. 3 part-time employees. 41 clients. A coffee maker older than my career. I built every bit of it myself, after community college, one tax season at a time, one client at a time, one sleepless April at a time. I live alone, 10 minutes from the house I grew up in. I write in pencil, because ink is for things that are already finished. People trust me with their money because I am calm. I am exact. I do not flinch at a bad number. 6 years ago, my father died in a hardware store parking lot. A heart attack. 57 years old, standing there holding a bag of deck screws like it was any other Tuesday. He was the axle of our family. And when an axle breaks, somebody has to crawl underneath the wagon and hold the whole thing up with their bare hands. That somebody was me. My grandmother Ruth's medication schedule lived in my phone, not my mother's. The furnace repairman had my number, not the house's. Every single tax return in that family crossed my desk every April, free of charge, because that's what you do for people you love. And on a shelf in my office, between 2 client files, sat a green 3-ring binder that nobody in my family had ever laid eyes on. I added to it quietly. Year after year. The way you tend a grave nobody visits but you. 6 years of my life lived inside that binder. My family didn't know it existed. By the end of this story, every single one of them would know exactly what was inside it. And it would cost more than any of them could stand to pay. But that September morning, it just sat there. Fat. Patient. Waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. You'd have liked my family, if you only ever saw them from the sidewalk. My mother, Carol, 61, could make a card table from a discount store look like a magazine spread. She directed every holiday like a stage play, who sat where, who carried what dish, whose news got announced and when. My sister Brooke is 37. Works part-time at the bank. Married to Josh, a warehouse manager with an easy laugh. Their daughter Ava is 12, all elbows and questions, and the only person at those dinners who ever once asked how my week had gone. My brother Dean is 29. Sells gym equipment. Has been one investor away from opening his own fitness franchise since he was 25. Every single Sunday, we ate pot roast at my mother's table. And every single Sunday, there came a moment when something needed doing, a form, a bill, a call to some insurance company, and the room would say the exact same sentence, in the exact same easy voice. Faith will handle it. Nobody ever asked if Faith wanted to handle it. You don't ask the dishwasher if it feels like running today. I fixed Aunt Patty's register at the craft fair. I did Dean's taxes. Brooke's taxes. Josh's side job taxes. And last fall, for the first time in my entire adult life, I said no to something. Dean wanted me to co-sign a loan for a truck he couldn't afford. I offered, instead, to help him budget for a used one. He looked at me like I'd slapped him across the face. The frost at Sunday dinner lasted 3 weeks. My mother's special weather, where nobody is ever technically angry, and the gravy simply gets passed to you last. Every time. Until you learn. I thought that frost had thawed by summer. I was wrong about what it had turned into. The whispering started 2 weeks before Labor Day. My mother called me on a Tuesday, right while I was closing out a client's payroll. "Don't make any plans, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the smile through the phone. "Not for Labor Day weekend. Promise me." I asked what was happening. "Just wait," she said. That Sunday at dinner, the whole house had a secret living in its walls. Brooke and my mother went quiet in the kitchen the moment I walked in for the salad bowl, the way a radio cuts out under a highway overpass. Dean grinned at his plate like a kid holding a firecracker behind his back. At one point, Ava bounced up to me and said, "Aunt Faith, did you know that we're," and Brooke's hand landed on her shoulder and steered her toward the dessert table so fast the girl's ponytail swung sideways. I told myself it was a surprise. For me. I know how that sounds now. But you have to understand what those 2 weeks felt like from the inside. I have spent 6 years being the person who plans things for other people. Nobody had planned a single thing for me since my 28th birthday, when my father grilled burgers in the rain and made everyone stand under the awning and sing anyway. So when my family started whispering, and smiling, and telling me to keep my calendar clear, some closed-up room in my chest cracked a window open. Maybe a party. Maybe a trip. Maybe just a cake, with my name written on it in someone else's handwriting for once. I audit other people's stories for a living. I can find the hole in a budget from across a room. But even a bookkeeper can misread a number when she wants the total to be true. I want to be clear about something, because it matters later. I did not walk into this blind. I asked. Twice. The first time, I asked my mother straight out if the family was doing the cottage for Labor Day, because if so, I needed to move 2 client deadlines and block off my own calendar. She looked me directly in the eye and said, "Stay in town, honey. Trust me, you'll want to be here." The second time, a week out, I asked Brooke if I should prep anything. Coolers. Groceries. The usual. She said, "Nope. All handled. Just keep your weekend free." So I did what a careful person does. I moved my quarterly review with my biggest client. I gave up my seat at a bookkeeping conference 2 hours away, a seat I'd been looking forward to since spring. Non-refundable. I checked the family group chat for logistics, because I am always the logistics. Nothing. Quiet as a closed bank on a Sunday. And here is the part that still stings to say out loud. That past January, I had tried to fix this family with a spreadsheet. A simple, fair cost-sharing plan. Who could chip in what, everything above board, laid out clean on my mother's kitchen table. My mother cried like I'd read her diary out loud in church. Brooke said, and I quote, "You're turning family into an invoice." Dean called me a cash register with a ponytail. So I folded my 1 page back into my purse. And I kept paying for everything myself. Quietly. The way I had for 6 years. They called me a cash register in January. By September, I would find out what they'd actually thought I was worth. The Friday before Labor Day, my mother invited me for dinner and asked me to sleep over. "Stay in your old room," she said. "Big day tomorrow. Just wait." She made pot roast on a Friday. That alone should have set off every alarm I own. The house felt warm in a rehearsed way, like a stage set, 10 minutes before the curtain goes up. Dean kept checking his phone and smiling at it. Brooke and Josh came by for dessert, and twice I walked into a conversation that stopped so hard I could feel the period at the end of the sentence they swallowed. I caught a glimpse of a suitcase behind the laundry room door. Navy blue. Wheels out. Ready to roll. And my chest did that stupid warm thing again. Luggage. A surprise trip, then. Maybe they'd finally planned something, and my only job was to show up and be celebrated for once. I remember standing in that hallway with a dish towel in my hand, deciding I would let them have the joy of surprising me. That I wouldn't peek. Wouldn't guess. Wouldn't do the math out loud. When Brooke's family left that night, Ava hugged me at the door longer than usual. Her face pressed into my ribs. She said, "Bye, Aunt Faith," in a small voice I misread as sleepiness. It wasn't sleepiness. My mother kissed my forehead at the top of the stairs, first time in years, and said it one more time, softer than before. "Don't make any plans." I brushed my teeth in the sink I'd used as a teenager, and fell asleep in my childhood bed, listening to my family whisper through the wall. Warm as a fool in winter. I slept well that night. That's the part one still can't quite forgive myself for. I woke at 7:40 to a house with no sound in it at all. No coffee maker gurgling. No shower running. No feet on the stairs. Just the refrigerator, humming to itself, like it was trying to keep me company. I lay there a full minute, telling myself they were hiding. That I'd walk downstairs and the lights would flip on and there'd be balloons. I walked down. The kitchen was clean and cold. The driveway through the window was empty. Both cars gone. And on the counter, under the good salt shaker, sat a single sheet of paper, in my mother's round, cheerful handwriting. Ruth's pills. Blue one with breakfast. White ones at night. List on the fridge. Trash goes out Tuesday. Water my tomatoes, they're fussy. Back Monday evening. Thanks, sweetie. No sorry. No explanation. No cottage. No destination. No will miss you. Not even my name. Just sweetie. The word you use for a waitress. Or a dog. I stood there in my pajamas holding that note, and the room did a slow, quiet tilt, because I finally saw the shape of it. Don't make any plans, not because something was planned for me. Because I was the plan. I was the house sitter. The pill counter. The tomato waterer. The staff doesn't get a warning when the family goes on vacation. The staff gets a list. I called my mother once. Straight to voicemail, her chipper greeting from 10 years ago, still frozen in time. I set the phone down on the counter, next to the note, and I made myself a cup of coffee in that spotless kitchen. And I drank it slowly, standing up, while somewhere north of me, my family was laughing on a highway. By noon, I found out where they were. The way you find out most things now, from a screen. It was Brooke's Instagram story. I wasn't even looking for it. It found me, the way a subpoena finds you. First frame, a wooden dock over blue-gray water. Dean, mid-cannonball, all knees and glory. Second frame, my mother, in her white sun hat, raising a plastic cup of something pink toward the camera, laughing with her whole face. A laugh I hadn't seen from her since before my father died. Third frame, Josh at a grill. Ava on a paddleboard. Sunlight everywhere. I knew that dock. I knew that water. Lake Arden. Our cottage. My father's cottage. 2 hours north. The place I had not been invited to. And across the bottom of that last frame, in the cheerful cursive font Brooke uses for happy announcements, sat the caption. Best trip ever when she's not around. LOL. 214 people had already seen it by noon. Aunt Patty had left a little red heart. I stood in my mother's kitchen and read it 4 times. The way you reread a column that keeps landing on a number you don't want to see. She's not around. LOL. I waited to feel the scream build. It didn't come. What came instead was worse. Or maybe, it was better. A stillness. Cold and wide, like a lake icing over in a single night. I did not comment. I did not post. I did not text a single soul. I put the phone face down on the counter. I washed my coffee cup. I dried it. I set it in the rack. Then I picked up my mother's watering can, filled it, and walked out to the tomatoes. And I stopped, with the can in midair. I looked at those fussy little plants for a long moment. I set the can down. Still full. On the porch rail. Every machine has an off switch. Mine had just been found. Here's what my family forgot when they left the state. They left me home alone with every device, every calendar, every account in that family I had ever been trusted to manage. Here's what I did not do that Saturday. I did not call Brooke demanding an explanation. I did not type the 11 furious paragraphs my thumbs were begging to type. I did not cry into leftover pot roast. Rage is a payday loan. It feels like money. It costs you double by Tuesday. I locked my mother's house, drove the 10 minutes home, showered, put on real clothes, and then did the one thing on that note actually worth doing. I picked up my grandmother's pills, and I drove to Ruth's little brick house on Cedar Street. Because here is who else had woken up that morning without a family, an 83-year-old woman with a bad hip and a sharper mind than every single one of us combined. They had left her behind too. Too much trouble, apparently, for a boat dock. Ruth opened the door in her good cardigan, looked at my face for exactly 1 second, and said, "Well, you'd better come in and crack some eggs." So the two people scratched off the guest list 8 scrambled eggs and toast at her kitchen table, off plates painted with little blue windmills. And neither of us said the word cottage for a full hour. There was a kind of peace in that. Sitting with the only person in my family who had never once handed me a list. If you've ever been the one holding everything together, and somehow still the last one anyone thinks to invite, tell me, in the comments, where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. And if this story already sounds familiar to you, go ahead and subscribe now. Because what I found on my grandmother's iPad 2 hours later, my family still, to this day, doesn't know I saw. And it changed everything about what happened next. My grandmother Ruth taught 3rd grade for 31 years, which means she can smell a lie before it's finished getting dressed in the morning. She poured me more coffee and told me what she knew, which was almost nothing. And that, itself, was the point. They'd told her about the trip on Thursday. An adult's getaway, Ruthie, you'd hate the stairs, is what my mother had said. To a woman who still does her own gutters, against everyone's direct orders. Ruth stirred her coffee and delivered a line I've thought about every day since. They took the boat keys, she said. Funny. Nobody ever asks who keeps the lights on. I looked up. She looked back at me, steady as a carpenter's level. She didn't know the details. She'd never seen my green binder. But grandmothers do arithmetic in their own private currency. She'd watched me show up with a toolbox in February and a checkbook in April, for 6 straight years. She'd drawn her own conclusions and filed them away quietly, the way teachers do, waiting for the student to finally be ready to learn. Then she said something stranger. Your father did one smart thing about that cottage, before he died. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Ask me about it when you're ready. I told her I was ready now. She shook her head. No, honey. You're angry now. Ready is different. Ready comes after you know what they're actually doing up there. I told her they were swimming, and drinking pink things out of plastic cups. Ruth looked out her kitchen window, toward the north, toward the lake, for a long, quiet moment. Then she said the second thing I have never once forgotten. Your mother came by Thursday with casseroles, and her good church folder, sitting right there on the car seat. Honey, nobody packs paperwork for a swim. I didn't know what she meant yet. Her iPad was about to tell me. The iPad was my fault, the way everything in this family was eventually my job, and therefore, eventually, my fault. 3 years ago, when Ruth's doctor moved her checkups to video calls, the family decided, say it with me, Faith will handle it. So I'd set up a tablet for her, using an old account of Brooke's, because Brooke had one sitting unused and nobody wanted to pay for new storage. Brooke never logged out. I maintained the thing every month like a good little IT department, updates, storage, the charging cable by her recliner. That Saturday afternoon, I picked it up off Ruth's end table to clear her cluttered lock screen before her Monday appointment. And there it was. Patient as a paper cut. A shared calendar notification. Gary Sutton, Cottage Man, 11 a.m. I went very, very still. Everybody in Crestwood knows Gary Sutton. His face smiles down from the biggest realtor billboard on Route 9, right next to the words, "You're home." His promise. My thumb hovered over that screen while my brain did what it's trained to do, reconcile the accounts. A realtor. At our cottage. On Labor Day. Monday, 11 in the morning. My entire family gathered in one place, coolers packed, kids entertained, grandmother safely parked at home, and the one person in this family who reads every single document, conveniently sent 2 hours south to water tomatoes. Numbers don't lie. But they will sit quietly while you lie to yourself. I'd spent 2 weeks believing the whispers were a party. That lock screen fixed that for good. My family hadn't taken a vacation. They had taken a meeting. And whatever that meeting was about, they had needed me, specifically, surgically, precisely me, not to be in the room for it. I want to be honest about what came next, because I've gone over the ethics of it myself, at 2 in the morning, more than once. I opened the Messages app on that iPad. Yes, a device I administered, signed into an account its actual owner had abandoned, quietly syncing conversations nobody had bothered to silence. But yes. I opened it, with cold hands, while Ruth pretended very hard to watch her bird feeder through the window. At the top of the list sat a group chat I had never once been added to. Cottage crew, with a little boat emoji. Created the 3rd week of May. While I was doing their taxes. Amending their returns. I scrolled up through 3 months of my family planning a weekend without me, the way other people plan weddings. Who'd bring the kayaks? Whether Josh's brother could lend a second grill. My mother, asking Brooke to pick the week Faith usually does quarterly filings, so she won't push to come up. And then, from the 2nd week of June, the message that rearranged something permanently inside my chest. Ava, sweet, loyal Ava, texting from her mother's phone, "Is Aunt Faith coming? She loves the lake." And my mother's reply, timestamped 9:41 on a Tuesday morning, sitting there in a plain gray bubble like it was nothing at all. "Not this one, honey. She'll do the math out loud." That was it. That was my crime, stated plainly, in writing, by my own mother. Not that I was cruel. Not that I was boring, or difficult, or unkind. That I would do the math out loud, in front of everyone. I read that message maybe 10 times. And somewhere around the 6th read, the hurt did something strange. It turned professional. "All right, Mom," I remember thinking, with a calm that frightened even me a little. "What math, exactly, were you so afraid I'd do?" I kept scrolling. And then I found the spreadsheet. Pinned to the top of Cottage Crew, above the kayak logistics and the sunscreen reminders, sat an attachment, Terrell Family Budget, version 3. I built that file 2 winters ago, at my mother's kitchen table. A clean little template with tabs and formulas, so she could track her own spending without calling me every Sunday. She'd hugged me and called me her clever girl. And now here it was, my own handiwork, repurposed to budget the family weekend I'd been quietly deleted from. Gas money, split 4 ways. A grocery list. And one line item that said, GS lunch, Carol. GS. Gary Sutton. They were buying the realtor a sandwich. With my spreadsheet. But the file was only the appetizer. The chat itself spelled out the rest in cheerful little bubbles. Sunday night, after the kids go to bed, family meeting. Everyone on the same page before Gary comes. Monday at 11, Gary Sutton walks the property. The words listing price appeared. The words before the fall market cools appeared. Dean, in July, deposit deadline is the Friday after Labor Day. Franchise rep confirmed. 60 grand holds my territory. My mother, in August, the cottage does nothing but cost money. Your father would want it working for this family. And then, from my mother, the last brick in the wall, posted 10 days before they left. Don't tell Faith till it's done. You know how she gets. I sat in my grandmother's recliner with that iPad warm on my knees, and understood the whole architecture of it at once. The way a column of numbers suddenly foots, all at once, into one final total. They weren't just spending a weekend without me. They were voting, on my father's cottage. On selling the last thing he ever built with his own 2 hands. And I wasn't on the ballot. I was on the chore list. I drove back to my apartment as the light went long and gold. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't pour a glass of wine. I went to the shelf in my home office, between 2 client boxes, and I took down the green binder. I set it on my kitchen table the way you'd set down something breakable. And I opened it to the first page, and for the first time in 6 years, I read it, start to finish, as a stranger would. Property taxes on the Lake Arden cottage. $3,900 a year. 6 years running. Paid by me. Receipts filed by quarter. Homeowner's insurance. $1,650 a year. Autopay, straight from my business account. My name on every single statement. The September the septic system failed. $7,200. And me, on the phone with the contractor at 6 in the morning, between client calls. The roof, after the ice storm. $4,800. The dock, the one Dean cannonballs off of. $2,300, to rebuild the pilings underneath his feet. The furnace. $3,100. Winterizing. Plowing the lane. The plumber. The chimney sweep. Another $10,700, nickel by nickel, autumn after autumn. At the bottom of the last page, in my own pencil, sat the total I had never once said out loud in my entire life. $61,400. The cottage does nothing but cost money, my mother had written. She was almost right. It did cost money. It just never once cost her any. I sat there with my palm flat against those pages, and I heard her voice from 2 weeks of phone calls, sweet as pie filling. Don't make any plans. I looked at 6 years of my quiet, invisible, unthanked competence, lying wide open on a kitchen table. And I made one. But a plan needs its paperwork. And mine was still missing one document. So the next morning, I went back to my grandmother's. Sunday morning. Ruth had coffee already waiting, because grandmothers keep their own private calendars. I sat down and said, I'm ready now. She nodded, like I'd finally turned in my homework, and told me about the smart thing. 8 years ago, 2 years before he died, my father had a warning. Chest pains, up on a ladder. An ambulance. A stent. A week lying in a hospital bed, doing the one thing men like him never do. Thinking about after. When he came home, he refinanced the cottage to fix its failing foundation. And on a gray Thursday that October, he drove to the title office and had the deed redone. Joint ownership. His name and mine. Ruth went with him that day. She signed the visitor log. She remembers he wore his funeral tie, because it was the only one already ironed. He said the cottage should belong to someone who shows up, she told me, both hands wrapped around her mug. He said it exactly like this, I'm quoting your father now, someone who shows up should hold the keys. I knew, of course. I'd signed the papers myself at 26, half listening, embarrassed by the fuss, assuming it was estate housekeeping that would only matter someday, in some distant gray-haired future. He meant to tell the family when the moment felt right. 22 months later, he was gone in a parking lot. And there had been no moment. And I had folded my own ownership away with my grief, and never once said it out loud, because saying it while my mother wept over his recliner would have looked like a land grab. And I was already too busy becoming the load-bearing wall of this family to go back and read my own blueprints. So here is where my story stood, that Sunday morning. My family was 2 hours north, planning to vote on a cottage they didn't fully own. I stood up to leave, my whole spine full of purpose. Ruth said, "Sit down. There's a second half." So I sat. And my grandmother told me about my mother. The part of her story that never once gets told at Sunday dinner. Carol was 23 when her own mother's health failed. There were 3 sisters. 2 of them had the good sense to live far away. So for 7 years, my mother spooned soup, changed sheets, managed pill bottles, and missed the entire decade where a young woman's life is supposed to get built. Her sisters sent Christmas cards from Florida, with beach photos and glitter glued to the corners. Nobody paid her. Nobody asked her. The one time she raised the subject of help, her own mother reportedly stared at her and said she didn't know daughters had started charging. Her mother thought that's what daughters were for, too, Ruth said, and let that sentence sit on the tablecloth between us like a stone she'd been carrying in her apron pocket for 40 years. I asked why she was telling me this. Was I supposed to forgive it? Ruth snorted. Forgiveness is your business. I'm just showing you the river. She leaned forward. Your mother drowned in this exact water, honey. And instead of draining it, she taught her own daughter to swim laps in it. And called it love. That's the oldest recipe in the world. Then she patted my hand once, briskly. Teacher to student. Knowing where the river starts doesn't keep you dry. I drove home the long way, past the hardware store where my father died. And I'll tell you the truth about what all that history did to me. Understanding my mother didn't change my next move by a single inch. It only made my hand steadier, when I finally made it. Sunday night. My kitchen table. The binder closed at my left elbow. A mug of tea going cold at my right. My laptop open in the middle, like an altar. 2 hours north, if the group chat's schedule held, my family was putting the kids to bed early and gathering on the screen porch for their family meeting. Everyone on the same page before Gary comes. Every phone in that cottage had my number saved in it. Any one of them could have called me, at any single point over the last 3 months. I checked, out of professional habit. My last text from my mother was 11 days old. It said, "Don't forget Ruth has a dentist appointment." So no. I did not text my family. I have never once texted them about any of this. And I never will. If that sounds cold to you, I understand. But read the note on that counter one more time, and tell me which one of us went cold first. Instead, at 9:12 that night, I wrote an email to the office of Gary Sutton Realty. 3 lines long. I have written grocery lists with more emotion in them. Line 1, I am a joint owner of record of the property at 14, Arden Shore Lane, parcel number attached. Line 2, the property is not for sale, and no listing agreement will be signed by me. Line 3, I'd suggest his office verify title before Monday's 11 o'clock appointment. And I thanked him for his time, because manners are free. I copied myself. I hit send at 9:12 p.m., and the whoosh sound was the single loudest thing that had happened in my apartment all weekend. The invisible daughter died right there, at a clean kitchen table, somewhere between one email and a cup of cold tea. I rinsed the mug. I went to bed. And I slept like a ledger that finally balanced. Labor Day morning, I did something radical. I lived my own life. I picked up Ruth at 8:30, and we went to the farmer's market on the square, where she haggled over late summer peaches like it was a contact sport, and introduced me to 3 separate women as my granddaughter, the one with the business. We bought too much corn. We got coffee from the truck with the striped awning, and sat on the bench outside the library. And my grandmother, who knew exactly what I'd sent at 9:12 the night before, because I'd told her myself over the peaches, never once asked me if I was sure. That's what being believed in feels like, if you've forgotten. Meanwhile, 2 hours north, I could see the morning as clearly as if I'd catered it myself. My mother, wiping down counters her guests would never notice. Setting out the lemon bars she only makes for company. Angling the good chairs toward the water. Dean, pacing the dock in his lucky polo, rehearsing franchise numbers he had never once run past the family bookkeeper. Brooke, arranging the porch furniture for maximum listing photo potential. A man with a billboard smile, loading a folder into his car, whistling, with absolutely no idea that an email was already sitting in his office inbox like a mousetrap in a bread box. At 10:58, on that library bench, I checked the time, turned my ringer off, and set my phone face down on my knee. Ruth watched me do it. And bit into a peach. At 11:04, the screen lit up for the first time. I watched it glow through the back of the case, patient as a lighthouse. I didn't touch it. Here is the anatomy of a family emergency, as observed from a sunny library bench. 11:04, Mom. 11:06, Mom again. 11:10, Dean. Then Dean. Then Dean a third time, in 4 minutes, like a man kicking a vending machine. 11:20, Brooke. 11:21, a voicemail. 11:40, Josh. Josh, who has never once called me in his entire life. A man so allergic to phones he texts thumbs up to voicemails. By noon, that screen looked like a slot machine that simply would not stop paying out. I drove Ruth home. I made her lunch. I fixed the sticky hinge on her screen door, because Labor Day is for labor. The only messages I opened all afternoon were from the one number I'll always answer. Ava, texting from her mother's phone, in the way of 12-year-olds, no capital letters, no context, pure signal. Aunt Faith, why is everyone yelling? 20 minutes later, the realtor guy left after like 10 minutes he didn't even get to the dock. Then, Grandma keeps saying a number and putting her hand over her mouth. And then, at 4:30, the one that told me the whole story without a single extra word. Mom deleted her story. Not posted an apology. Not called me on speaker to say we're so sorry, come up, we'll wait. Deleted the evidence. I put my phone on the charger at 9 that night, and watched a documentary about lighthouses. By midnight, the counter on my missed calls read 63, from 5 different numbers. And not one voicemail among them had yet said the only word that actually mattered. Somewhere around hour 2, they'd learned who owned the cottage. From what I pieced together, it took them until dark to work out who'd been paying for it all along. Tuesday morning, over coffee, I listened to my voicemails the way I review a client's shoebox of receipts, chronologically, without flinching, pencil in hand. Dean, 11:21, shouting over Lake Wind, what did you do? Gary walked. You sabotaged me. Call me back right now. No question about whether it was true. Straight for the wound. Brooke, 1:15, in her bank voice, the one she uses to deny loans gently, Faith, there's been a misunderstanding, and I think if we all just talk like adults, and then a pause, and lower, off script, Mom says there are records. Just call me. Aunt Patty, 3 o'clock, syrup over gravel, honey, whatever this is about, family works it out. Also, is it true about the taxes? Call Aunt Patty. And then my mother. 3 voicemails, spread across the day like the stages of a fever. The first, brisk and managerial, Faith and Terrell. Call me this minute. This is a family matter. The second, at dusk, quieter, the wind gone out of it, you paid the septic, Faith. The roof. Why didn't you just, and then a long breath. And a click. And the third, at 11:58 p.m. Barely above a whisper. The voice of a woman sitting alone on a dark porch while everyone else pretends to sleep. Please come home. We didn't know. I set my pencil down. I looked out my window at the parking lot of my ordinary, self-made little life. And I said, to my empty kitchen, the only reply that voicemail deserved. You knew enough to whisper. 63 calls in one single day, from a family that couldn't manage to dial my number once, all summer, to say, pack a bag. If someone in your life only ever calls when the lights go out, tell me about it, in the comments below. I read every one of them. And stay with me, because what I said at that living room table, 2 nights later, is the part my family will never, ever forget. They came home Tuesday. A day late, because you can't check out of a lake cottage angry any faster than you can check out of one happy. Dean didn't bother calling first. At 12:40, he shouldered through the door of my office on Main Street, sunburned and thunderous, straight past Marcy at the front desk, and stood over my chair, smelling like lake water and betrayal. You knew, he said. You sat down here and let us drive right into a wall. I finished the entry I was typing. Saved the file. Folded my hands. You planned for 4 months, I said. I sent one email. He went off like a shaken soda can. I'd embarrassed him in front of the franchise people. I'd always thought I was better than everyone. This is why nobody wanted you there, he said. That last one hung in the air between us, and even he had the decency to look away from it, just for a second. Then he said the sentence he'd actually walked in there to say, the one the whole cottage had no doubt agreed on, in some quiet moment on that porch. Family money is family money, Faith. I looked at my brother. 29 years old. Strong as a barn door. Not a bad man, just a man who'd been served his whole life, and mistaken it for weather. Family money is family money, I repeated back to him. Then it's strange none of the family paid any. His jaw worked. He wanted to hit something, and there was nothing in my tidy little office soft enough to take it. So he kicked my wastebasket into the wall on his way out. Paper, everywhere. Marcy leaned in, wide-eyed, and asked if I was okay. I was picking crumpled paper up off my floor. And I realized, mostly, I was. But the visit that actually got under my skin came that evening. Brooke. And Brooke brought something I didn't have. A piece of the actual truth. She knocked on my apartment door at 7, holding a grocery store lasagna like a white flag. Mascara ghosted under her eyes. I let her in, because I wanted answers more than I wanted distance. And my sister has never once been able to hold a secret in front of a witness. She started with the caption. It was a stupid joke, she said, staring at my counter instead of at me. You were being, I thought you'd chosen work over us. Again. I was mad at you. It was ugly. I'm sorry. Chosen work over us. I asked her, carefully, exactly what she meant. And I watched my sister's face do something complicated. Mom told us in June, Brooke said. She said she'd invited you first, before any of us. She said you told her Labor Day was your busiest client stretch, some quarterly thing, and that we should just go without you. You insisted. And we shouldn't bring it up, because you already felt guilty about it. The kitchen went very quiet. She stood in my driveway, Faith, my sister said. She told me, don't pester your sister about the trip. She'll just feel worse. So there it was. The missing column. To me, my mother had said, don't make any plans. Stay in town. Just wait. To them, she had said, Faith turned us down. Don't mention it to her. 2 stories. Airtight. Both pointed away from each other, like curtains hung over the exact same window. And one director, standing between them, quietly making sure both halves of her family never once compared notes. Even the cruelty in that caption had been farmed, in a way. Brooke had aimed it at a sister she genuinely believed had snubbed the whole family. I'm not excusing her, LOL is LOL. But as she stood in my kitchen, crying into her own casserole dish, I finally saw the full blueprint. My mother hadn't just hidden a trip from me. She had hidden me from my family. Wednesday, the summons started. My mother wanted me at the house, to straighten this out as a family, at her table, on her clock, with her pot roast serving as anesthesia. Aunt Patty offered to mediate, which, from Patty, means sit close enough to hear everything. I declined all of it, politely. The way I decline clients who come to me wanting creative accounting. Then I sent my first message to my family since Friday. One text, to the regular group chat, the public one. Not the one with the boat emoji. Wednesday, 7 p.m. Mom's living room. Everyone. I'll bring the paperwork. That was the entire message. I watched 3 sets of typing dots rise and fall, like people bobbing underwater, trying to find air. After 6 minutes, the only reply came from Dean. Okay. Power isn't loud. It turns out power is being the one who names the time, and brings the documents. Sound familiar, Mom? I spent that whole afternoon at my office copier like a priest preparing communion. 5 sets, collated, clipped, every receipt, every statement, every check. 6 years of the green binder, reproduced in black and white. Marcy asked if I was okay, for the second time in 2 days. Never better, I told her. And I meant it, which worried me more than the alternative would have. I stopped at Ruth's on my way home. She was watching her shows, and she muted the television, which is how you know a conversation is about to matter. I asked her to come. I'll sit in the armchair, she said. You'll stand. Then she looked at me over her glasses, with those third-grade teacher eyes that have watched 40 years of children decide, quietly, who they were going to be. Go get your inheritance, honey, she said. Not the cottage. The other thing. I didn't fully understand her until it was already over. I wasn't going there to win. I had already won on Monday, at 11:04 in the morning. I was going there to decide, once and for all, what winning would actually cost. I got to my mother's house at 7 o'clock exactly, because punctuality is a language, and I wanted mine to sound formal. The living room was staged, of course. My mother has never once hosted an ambush without refreshments. Lemon bars on the good plate. Coffee in the carafe. Lamps turned to their most forgiving setting. My father looked down from the mantel, holding a walleye and a smile, 20 summers old. Dean stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw set, a deadline 2 days away and already dying in his chest. Brooke and Josh shared the love seat like 2 people at a deposition. Aunt Patty had been disinvited, a condition I'd made myself, and her absence had its own weight, like a muted trumpet. Ruth took the armchair by the lamp, hands folded on her cane, magnificent. My mother sat on the edge of the sofa in her church cardigan, hair done, face composed, a woman prepared to manage her way through one more family weather event. Ava was supposed to be upstairs. I saw her anyway, through the balusters at the top of the staircase, chin on her knees. I didn't say a word. Some educations, you don't interrupt. Faith, my mother began, in the voice she uses to return soup at restaurants. Before anything else, I want you to know how much we. I raised one hand, gently. And the sentence died of natural causes. I crossed the carpet I'd learned to crawl on as a baby, and I set the green binder down on the coffee table, between the lemon bars and the coasters, square to the table's edge, the way I'd rehearsed without ever admitting to myself that I'd rehearsed it. The room looked at that binder the way you'd look at a strange dog sitting calmly in your living room. My name is on the deed, I said. But that's not the part you don't know yet. My mother said my name the way you'd handle glass. I opened the binder. I stayed standing. And I did what I do better than anyone else in that room. I read the record into evidence. Property taxes, Lake Arden Cottage. $3,900 a year. Here's 6 years of county receipts. Note the name on every one. I laid the page flat and turned it toward them. Homeowner's insurance. $1,650 a year. Auto paid from Terrell Bookkeeping, that's my business, which means that's my name again. Paid. September, 4 years ago. The septic failure. You all remember the smell, you joked about it at Thanksgiving. $7,200. Here's the contractor's invoice. And here's who signed it, at 6 in the morning. Page. 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 The roof, after the ice storm. 4,800. The dock you cannonball off, Dean, I rebuilt the pilings under your feet 2 summers ago. 2,300. The furnace. 3,100. Plowing. Winterizing. The chimney. The plumber. Page. 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 Nobody touched a single lemon bar. Josh was the first to stop meeting my eyes. And Josh had the least to be ashamed of in that whole room, which tells you something about shame, and how it books itself to the wrong accounts entirely. I turned to the last sheet, the one with 6 years of pencil arithmetic crowded into the margin, and I said the number out loud, in that living room, for the first time anywhere on earth. $61,400. Then I set a clipped photocopy of the entire binder down in front of each of them. Mom. Dean. Brooke. Josh. And one for the armchair, because Ruth had earned herself a program for the show. Mom was right about one thing, I said, and I looked at her, and my voice stayed level, and hers was nowhere to be found. I do the math out loud. The clock over the kitchen doorway ticked. Somewhere upstairs, a stair creaked, and went still. My mother rose off the sofa cushion, and I braced myself for the denial. The reframe. The managed weather I had been forecast my entire life. That is not what came out of her. What came out of my mother was the truth. And it came out the way water comes through a failed foundation, first a seam, then all at once. She sat back down, mid-rise, as if her knees had simply voted against the performance. She looked down at the photocopy in her lap, and she said, I couldn't cover it. The room went so quiet I could hear the coffee cooling. After your father died, the pension was half what we, her hand smoothed the pages without reading them. I refinanced. And then the card. And then the home equity loan. Every month, I'd sit at that kitchen table with your little spreadsheet and move numbers around like furniture. And there was never. She stopped. Started again. Your father handled it. Then he didn't. And everyone assumed I was fine. And I let them, because. She looked up. And for one unguarded second, I saw underneath the stage director, all the way down to the scared bookkeeper of her own quiet, failing life. Because I could not sit at Thanksgiving and be the poor widow. I could not. Dean said, Mom, you don't have to. And she kept going, right over him, straight at me. The bills started coming, and your name was already on things. And it was so easy. You never asked for credit. You never even told them. A small, terrible laugh. You made it so easy. And then my mother folded her hands in her lap, and delivered, in the voice of a woman reciting something she had learned long before she ever learned to question it. Nobody ever asked me either, you know. All those years with your grandma Dorothy. Nobody asked. I thought that's what daughters were for. In the armchair, Ruth closed her eyes, like someone hearing a diagnosis she'd already predicted. And I stood there, holding 6 years of paper, understanding my mother completely. And finally, the river. The drowning. All of it. That's the saddest sentence you've ever said, Mom, I said quietly. And it's still not an apology. Brooke pulled in a breath. And then came the offer. They pivoted the way families do, no signal, all at once, like a flock of starlings turning in the sky. Denial hadn't survived the binder. So they reached, instead, for the checkbook. Brooke leaned forward, bank voice fully engaged, hand sketching reasonableness in the air. Okay, here's what makes sense. The cottage sells. It's a seller's market, Gary says. 310, maybe 320. The first 61.4 comes off the top and goes straight to you. Every cent back, Faith. Before anyone else sees a dime. That's fair. Nobody's asking you to lose anything. Dean came off the window like a man given one more rep. 60 for the deposit holds my territory till Friday. Faith, Friday. This franchise runs 8% margins in towns half this size. I'll have Mom paid back in 3 years. You and me in 2. It's not spending, it's seeding. Dad would get that. Dad built things. He was pacing now, pitching to the whole room, to the mantel, to the walleye. And then my mother did the thing I'd been braced for since Monday. The thing she does better than anyone else in the whole world. She crossed the carpet, sat beside me on the arm of the sofa, and took my hand in both of hers, warm and dry, and certain. And she made her real offer. Not money. The other currency. Sign it, sweetheart. Just this once, and everything changes. I promise you, you'd run it all. The money, the decisions, everything, through you. Out in the open, the way it always should have been. Every trip. Every holiday. You're the first call I make. First, Faith. Not the note on the counter. Never again. She squeezed my hand. You'd be the head of this family. You practically already are. All you have to do is sign. And there it was. Gift-wrapped and glowing. Everything I had wanted since I was 28 years old, offered at last, sincerely, in front of witnesses. Every price tag in that room was face up now. Including mine. They were offering me the family I'd been quietly paying for all along. All I had to do was keep paying. I looked down at my mother's hands, wrapped around mine. And I understood, at last, all the way down, exactly what I was being offered. A promotion. Head of family. Chief of staff of my own life. Senior vice president of other people's emergencies, with a corner office in the same house where they whisper the second I walk in. 10 days ago, I would have signed. That's the part that still scares me. How close 10 days is. I slid my hand out from between my mother's, gently, the way you take your hand back from a sleeping child. And I stood up straight, and I kept my voice at the exact register I used to tell a client their business is insolvent. Low. Kind. Immovable. The cottage is not for sale, I said. Not this fall. Not to fund a deposit. Not to keep anyone from looking poor at Thanksgiving. Dad put 2 names on that deed, and both of them are staying on it. It stays open to this whole family. Ava learns to dive off that dock next summer. That doesn't change. What changes is this. I picked up the binder and closed it. The invisible payments end on the 30th. Taxes, insurance, repairs, from now on, the cottage runs on a written agreement. Everyone's share, on paper. Mine included. I'll draft it for free. It's the last free thing I'm doing. I turned to Dean. The answer on the 60,000 is no. Not out of spite. A dream you can't fund without selling your father's dock isn't a dream yet. It's a bill. When you've got a real plan, I'll go over every number with you, at my desk, in daylight. And then, to my mother, because she was still looking up at me from the arm of the sofa, watching the deal die in her own eyes. I don't want to run this family, Mom. I never did. I wanted to be in it. There's a difference. And it took me $61,000 to learn it. I'll teach anyone in this room the binder. I'll carry no one. I'm your daughter. I was never your staff. Behind me, Dean kicked the leg of the coffee table so hard the carafe jumped. Then it's gone, he said, too loud for the room. The territory. The franchise. Friday, it's gone. And that's on you. He pointed at me the way you point at a car wreck. You know what you are? You're the reason this family is over. Dad's probably. And he stopped himself right there, at the edge of the one sentence none of us ever finish. He grabbed his jacket instead. The door didn't slam so much as detonate. The pictures on the wall did a little shiver. And the deadline died right there, in the echo. My mother looked at the door. And looked at me. And went after neither of us. She sat on the arm of the sofa, hands in her lap, and chose silence one more time, the way she'd chosen it all summer. That was my payment in full. And I felt it clear the account. Brooke stood, gathered Josh with a glance, and said, "I'll call you," in a voice that meant someday. Maybe. Thinner than before. Then small feet on the stairs. Ava, in her sleep shirt, passed straight by her mother's outstretched hand, across the whole carpet, straight to me. Arms around my ribs, fierce as a seatbelt. She tipped her chin up and whispered, "Great Ruth said you'd stand up. She told me to watch." I looked over her head at Ruth, who was studying the ceiling with the practiced innocence of a career educator. I hugged my niece. Said good night to the room in general. And walked out the front door of the house I grew up in, lighter and poorer than I had ever been in my entire life, both at once, having just traded the family I'd been buying for the person I'd actually been burying. The September night smelled like cut grass and rain coming. Grief and relief, it turns out, can ride in on the exact same breath. I know. Because I drove home on one. I'd love to tell you the phone rang the next morning, full of apologies. It didn't work that way. Because it never does. Dean went silent. No calls. No Sunday dinners. A mutual friend reported he'd picked up extra shifts, and told people his sister chose a shack over her own brother. Brooke texted on holidays. Polite as a greeting card. And once, in November, sent 3 photos of Ava's science fair project, with no caption at all, which, from Brooke, is practically a sonnet. Aunt Patty changed sides 4 times, depending on her audience that week. The town talked. Then it found newer weather to gossip about. And then, on a gray Tuesday in October, the bell over my office door rang, and my mother walked in. No lasagna. No speech. Holding a plastic grocery bag full of unopened envelopes, and she stood at the counter like a first-time client, and said, "Teach me the binder." So I did. We started with how to read a tax bill. She cried once, quietly, over the home equity statement, and I handed her the tissues and a highlighter, in that exact order, because in my family, love was finally learning to speak in accounting. She took a part-time job at the fabric store on the square. Her choice. Not mine. And in December, she set a check for $200 down on my counter, the first payment of a plan she'd invented entirely on her own. Against $61,000, it was a single raindrop in a quarry. And we both knew it. And I deposited it anyway. Because the point of that check was never the amount. Ava started coming by on Fridays after school, to learn what she calls allowance math. Small, true things. It turns out, that's what's left standing, when the performance finally closes. And unlike pot roast and promises, small true things compound. This Labor Day, 1 year, almost to the hour, since I woke up to that silent house, I woke up at the cottage on Lake Arden. First one up. Coffee in my father's old mug. Bare feet on the dock he paid for. And I kept standing. The lake did its early morning trick, where it holds the whole sky still for you, just for a minute. Ruth was on the porch by 8, wrapped in a quilt, supervising the horizon. Ava spent the whole morning practicing her dive off the end of the dock, badly and magnificently, while Brooke, who'd come up Saturday, awkward and trying, which counts, filmed every single attempt and posted none of them. My mother arrived at noon, with potato salad, and without commentary, and sat in a lawn chair like a guest. Because that's exactly what she was now. And guests, it turns out, can be delightful. There's a cost-sharing agreement, in a drawer in that kitchen, with 4 signatures on it. Nobody whispers there anymore. The whole architecture of whisper has been condemned. Dean didn't come. His name is still in the agreement anyway, his share marked paid by owner, Faith, for 1 more year. Because the door isn't locked to my brother. It just has visiting hours now. Like every honest door should. Late in the afternoon, Ruth watched me flip burgers in a rain-spitting breeze under the awning, the way my father used to. And she smiled at something far away. They told me once, don't make any plans. I made plans. If you keep only one line from my story tonight, keep this one. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And the day a woman finally learns the difference is the day she stops being furniture in other people's houses, and starts being the author of her own. That's my story. One note on a counter. One green binder. 63 missed calls. And one plan I finally made, for myself. If this reminded you of a ledger you'd been keeping quietly, for people who never once asked what it cost you, take that as your sign. Bring it into the daylight. Kindly, and completely. And let the people who love you prove it, with more than a guest list. If you know a woman who needs to hear this today, share this with her. Drop a comment, and tell me, what would you have done, at that living room table? I read every single one. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet. And I'll see you in the next one.